and welcome to the Buckets and Tea NBA show. I'm your host, Cathryn Naiker. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode. Today, joining me, he works for Sportsnet. He works for Yahoo Sports Canada. He used to work for the Raptors. But he's amazing. You know him. You love him. It's Vivek Jacob. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great. I'm glad to be here, and we'll see how I survive having woken up at 4:30 a.m.
Yes, let's talk about this. So you've been covering cricket, actually.
Yeah.
So you've been watching these like epic long cricket matches. There's a tournament happening right now. You started a Substack about it. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I've got a Substack called Play in the V, and you can find all the details on my Twitter page at Vivek M. Jacob. So you can, if you're a cricket fan and are looking to not watch all 8 hours of these games and just have a nice little summary of everything that's happening, you can just tune into my Substack and subscribe and get it all in your email. But yeah, I have been waking up at 4:30 a.m. The tournament started I want to say about 3 weeks ago. And so I feel like my body has like slowly adjusted. There definitely was like after the first week, my body was just like, no, this is not happening. And I
Waking
just
up at like
crashed.
4:30 every day.
Yeah. So wake up by 4:30 and then um staying up. Usually the games go up till about 11 or 12, and then I'll finish up my writing and then eat lunch and then crash.
Mm-hmm.
Today the plan was so today actually worked out pretty well because India was like so dominant that the game finished at like 10.
Okay, because we would be recording this during your nap time.
Yes,
Otherwise, on Thursday.
so I have napped.
I was kind of hoping to get this
for
like delirious version of you, like just this
But it was only
tired,
for an hour.
delirious. Okay. All right.
So I got an hour nap in, so I think that might suffice for this pod, and then I will go right back to sleep as soon as we're done.
Oh my God. And then you're covering the basketball games at night.
Accurate.
So I mean, you might as well just be nocturnal at this point.
Yeah, 100%. That's yeah, maybe I can work some security shifts too.
Well, listen, I mean, I feel
not to rat anyone out, but I know a couple security people at my condo who are Indian, and they're just like, yeah, when we work the night shift, we've just got the games on. So
well,
at least they've got company now.
Honestly, at least they're awake. At least they're awake and alert, because I don't know if I could do that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Especially, 100%. 1 through 4:30 a.m., right? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Like when the West Coast NBA games are done and the cricket hasn't started yet. That's a real trying time.
Yeah, it's got to be. I could make some jokes, but it's a PG show, I think. So
I don't know. I am actually unsure. No one gave me those kinds of guidelines. But in any case, check out Vivek's Substack. Let his sacrifice be worth it. Just start watching cricket. Just for Vivek.
Just start.
Just start, because you have a local person covering it for you, watching those 8 hours, so you don't have to. It's very kind of you. Also, for those watching on YouTube, I was commenting about how much larger my head looks versus yours because of our setup. So I don't know how that's gonna work, but it is what it is. Just lead. We'll do that just for the
rest of the show like this.
Just so I could feel better. Yeah, this show really is about my emotional labor. But no, let's get into this. We've had a crazy week in the NBA. Once again, the James Harden trade happened. He went to the Clippers officially. Like last week I was on the pod here with Katie, and we were talking about how like Philly just like has to do something. They can't drag this on like the way the Ben Simmons thing dragged on before. And they were able to get a deal to happen. So the Clippers acquired James Harden as well as PJ Tucker. And then who's this guy? Philippe Petrusev? I don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
The funny part is Philip Petrusev has already been traded
Again?
since going to his new team.
Where is he now?
He has been traded to the Sacramento Kings.
Wow, you're really on top of it. And the Sixers required a 2028 unprotected first round pick, as well a 2029 first round pick swap rights with Clippers protected. What does this mean, Vivek? You wrote
the swap rights?
Yeah.
So basically in 2029, say for example, if the Clippers are in bad shape and they just happen to have the 5th pick and the Sixers have like the 15th pick,
they Sixers can swap it.
Can swap.
Wow.
And
okay.
Be like, we have the pretty 5th
big
pick now.
And then as well as a 2026 pick via OKC, which is from the Westbrook, from the Paul George trade, I believe. And then they also acquired Nicholas Batum, Robert Covington, Marcus Morris, KJ Martin, and then a 2024 second round pick. And then they had to waive Danny Green. So the way I see this trade is I feel like the 76ers aren't done. I think they did this so they could have other assets in which to move before the trade deadline. Not to say that they're actively shopping for anyone right now. I think they want to see how this team plays over the next 6 weeks or so. And then somewhere like late December, early January, they'll start shopping these picks around. Because they're not going to hold on to this and be patient and waste another year of Embiid's prime. So I actually think this was a really good deal. From the 76ers perspective. We just have to wait and see who these picks end up becoming. And then on the Clippers side of things, I think this whole situation is kind of funny because I don't think anyone else was particularly in the market for James Harden. I think if you were the 76ers, if you were the Clippers, you could have held out to get James Harden for less, I would imagine. I don't think there was any real competition for him. I think they have too many ball handlers or too many players that need the ball in their hands all the time now. So I'm curious to see how that's going to fit from a chemistry perspective. And even if they do become a bit better, I don't think they became good enough to beat the Nuggets. You know what I mean? I don't see this team beating the Nuggets in a 7-game series. So it's hard to say right now, but it feels like this might not have been worth it in the long run. But Vivek, what do you think?
So there's so many different sides to this trade. So for example, from the Philly perspective, the wait and see will go on until the off season, because what they've also done with this trade is create about 50 million, potentially more, in cap space. And so they can go get a max free agent. The free agent class is not amazing, but there is possibly someone like a Pascal Siakam who could be there. And so you mentioned the picks that they could potentially use in another deal between now and mid-Feb, but before the trade deadline. That could certainly be the case, and they could look to get a good player, maybe an all-star type player.
You think Pascal wants to play with Nick Nurse again?
I mean, made 2 all-NBA teams with him.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know how much they get along, but yeah, that would be very interesting.
And so I think, and also the chance to play with his Cameroonian brother, I think might appeal to him.
Yes.
So I think the wait and see with Philly will carry over until the off season. That's part of why they also didn't sign Tyrese Maxey to an extension this past summer, because they wanted to keep that flexibility. And so Philly is definitely in wait and see mode. The Clippers, I think, to me, and I wrote this in a piece for Sportsnet breaking down the trade from a Clippers perspective, is they have basically recommitted to the regular season. And they
Right.
have said, we already had the Ty Lue quote about, hey, we got to take the regular season more seriously. And we can't just kind of wait until the playoffs, because what happens is, for example, last season, they had to go on an 11 win, 5 loss record to avoid the play-in tournament in those final 16 games. The previous season, the injuries were too much. They didn't even make the playoffs. And so they have said, hey, we need to sort stuff out in the regular season. Even with this James Harden trade, they probably didn't want to wait until the trade deadline to only give themselves a couple months to figure it out. And so now they've got pretty much a whole season to figure this out. And so with James Harden, you are making a 1,000% regular season bet. He is a regular season killer. He will get this team to at least 50 wins. Kawhi can say, hey, I need a night off. No problem. James Harden, take all the shots you want. Paul George needs a night off. No problem. And so I think that's the bet that they've made, where it's like, and this is basically what I said, James Harden could be the best load manager Kawhi has had since Alex McKechnie. And so if you can take that to the playoffs and you get Kawhi there safe and healthy, that's when you could get the payoff, right? And that's what this is all about. To me, having seen Kawhi up close, if he is healthy in the postseason, all bets are off.
Right.
He can beat any team in the postseason. And I think they just have to get there. They just have to get him in as best shape as possible. And you look at Paul George and Kawhi defensively, obviously that's a beast. Now you throw PJ Tucker into the mix as well defensively. And if he's arguably defending the third best wing now, as opposed to, situations in Milwaukee or wherever where he had to defend, in Philly where he had to defend the opposing team's best player, you're looking at arguably the best defensive wing trio in the league. And then there's the offense.
Yeah, I think PJ Tucker is kind of like an underrated, like really good part of this deal for the Clippers. I think that's a great point. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right about James Harden being it for the regular season. I am so curious though, like in the playoffs with this, like I'm assuming a Harden Westbrook backcourt, which we kind of saw with the 2020 Houston Rockets, I believe. I mean, I don't know how this is going to turn out. They've been together now. This is their third time on a team together, Westbrook and Harden. Also, too, like they grew up together in LA. I feel like they have such a wild history with one another. I feel like it's mainly love, but maybe a little bit something else. I'm not sure. I don't know how they're gonna run this offense, to get Kawhi the ball and all of this if they're so used to just jacking up shots on their own all season long.
To me, at some point, Westbrook has to commit to coming off the bench.
Right. You think he's going to be a 6-man?
Yeah, it's not going to be Harden, obviously. You don't give up all those assets and pay him the kind of money that you're paying him to come off the bench. Westbrook obviously took a significant pay cut to come back to the Clippers. He's happy there. How happy will he be if he's coming off the bench? Who knows? But I think that's the move that needs to happen, because for all that I said about PJ Tucker and Kawhi and Paul George, I said PJ and I was like, did I say PG already? As good as those three can be defensively, it can be completely negated by having Harden and Westbrook together in the backcourt. And so I think that's where the starting lineup needs to be: Harden, Kawhi, PG, Tucker, and Zubac.
Right.
I laughed again because I said PG and then I said Tucker, and it's just messing with me.
Yeah. But we know what you meant. Yeah, I agree. I think a lot a lot still needs to unfold is what I'm trying to say. I think a lot still needs to unfold here. There's a lot unsettled. I think with both teams, I'm so curious to see how this Clippers team is going to adjust. I love your point about them taking the regular season more seriously. I mean, we saw that in that overtime game last night against the Lakers. Like it's been a long time. I think they hadn't played a back-to-back in like several years. And, there was a lot of talk about the amount of minutes that they were playing in this OT game and like, is this sustainable and stuff like that. So yeah, I think, the Clippers are really looking at this year as like, it has to happen this year.
It's now or never.
Yeah, it's now or never for them. And so, at least it's nice to see them pushing it. So we'll see how it turns out. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I didn't know if you were going to add more to there. Let's move on to the in-season tournament. This episode's going to come out on Friday, and the in-season tournament will be starting on Friday. What do you make of this whole plan from the NBA? Do you think it's going to work? Do you think we're going to get more competitive basketball as a result? Do you think it'll equal to a ratings increase? What do you think?
I think on the whole, it will have more appeal if it becomes a predictor of playoff success. Because then you'll have fans looking at it saying, oh, like say, for example, if there was a play-in tournament last year and the Nuggets won it, and then they go on to win the title, then you're saying, oh, okay, there's some kind of correlation possibly, and you're saying, okay, teams are taking this seriously. The best team that's coming out of this, they should be the favorites, But if you come out of this and it just ends up being like a fun little gimmicky thing, and with all due respect, like say the Orlando Magic win it, and they don't end up making the playoffs, then you're kind of looking at it and saying, well, what does this really tell me? And so I think that's going to be the interesting thing to see. Like if you see the top teams really take it seriously, really compete, and that ends up being, the semifinals and the final, then I think it's cool. But hey, there are people who would argue the other way as well, right? Like people would say, hey, give me the March Madness, give me the 16 seed that goes all the way, and then that can be fun on its own. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting. Like, I think there's a whole sports betting component to this as well that I think will maybe increase bets. I don't really sports bet, so I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think like let's use your example of Orlando. I mean, if Orlando won the in-season tournament, that would be big for their market locally. And then maybe people watch more Orlando games as a result. Because you're right, like if this existed last year and the Nuggets won, we probably would have seen more Nuggets games as a result as well, because people would have been more curious to see them more. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think in terms of predicting, that's going to help the sports betting market. I don't know if it helps me as a fan in terms of watching more games, because it's like, well, I'm a sicko and I'm already watching a bunch of games. But you know what I mean? Like I'm already here. I don't need it. Like I don't know if casual fans are looking at this like, hey, I need to see this in-season tournament. Maybe those last few days in Vegas will really feel like an event that people will have to tune into. I feel like the month of November, like, we'll see if like the new court design gives the whole game a new feel or not, or gives it more intensity or not. I mean, maybe it will, because I'm not sure. Like, I feel like the incentive of like the players winning like $500,000 or whatever it is, I don't know if that alone is motivation. I think it's more like, do we take this tournament seriously or not? And we'll see that, I guess, later. Well, when this episode airs, it'll be later tonight.
Right. And that's where I think the NBA has done a good thing of just combining the in-season tournament within the regular season games, right? I think the worst thing would have been a scenario where you have separate group games that are happening outside of the regular season, and then say, the Clippers or whoever just like, hey, we're actually just going to load manage Kawhi for these group games.
Right. Yeah.
Then it's like,
yeah.
No one cares,
Yeah.
And so I think putting it within these regular season games and just making the regular season games count for a bit more, it was an important decision. And I think that's a good move. I think what's going to be a bit weird when watching these games is it's not actually goodbye, when they get knocked out.
Right. Like, it's like, I'll see you again in like February or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Like when you've got all these college fans watching their team in the tournament or whatever, that final game, you know, like when you get knocked out, it's over. Like there's that sadness and everything, and that's part of the intensity during the game, right? And so with the in-season tournament, these fans are going to be watching these games, and then it could be like a group decider. Oh, we get to the semis if we win this one, or we're out, and that excitement might be there. But then by the end of the game, it's also like, okay, we'll see you Friday night.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. Like the emotional stakes from a fan perspective aren't necessarily there. I mean, I think I for me, I wish that like the grand prize also included something like guaranteed home court advantage in the playoffs or something like that. I think that would get me more emotionally invested as a fan into it because then it's like, oh man, we really want that. You know, like that's good for us, you know, when we
So the one thing I do have to say is the Celtics need to get away from this whole like Milwaukee Bucks tone,
Mm. Mhm, mhm, mhm. It
because I think
does look
it
like the
was
Bucks, I agree.
it was I think their Christmas uniforms last season that I was like, am I watching the Bucks? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I
And
noticed that with, the Denver Nuggets court looks like the Golden State Warriors colors. Like, they're getting a little too
yeah,
yeah.
I like the Wolves. Um, I like the Jazz going with the full purple.
Mhm.
So those are the ones I like. I'm not quite sure why Atlanta is blue.
Yeah, I don't know why Atlanta is blue.
Yeah, so
See, look,
Detroit kind of
you're
funky.
having opinions.
Yeah, no, I just needed to pull it up. I just meant that I hadn't looked at it as closely to provide an informed opinion. I
Yeah.
was just kind of when they came out, I was kind of like, hey, what does the Raptors court look like? Okay, I'm good.
Yeah, 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 that's fair, that's fair. I'm always paying attention to the whole league.
But
Um
you know, now that I'm seeing more of it, I kind of wish that they did more around the 3-point arc. Like it's all very like that entire vertical going across the paint, like through the middle.
mm,
Like that's like the consistent theme. right? And so that is something I wouldn't have minded seeing more of. And I hope the outer court is actually a different color, because that's the one thing I hate, because it makes life for the officials so much more difficult. Like those courts that, like, the baseline, like the inside is exactly the same color as what's just outside to make a call on, those out of bounds plays. And so I just hope those are different colors.
Yeah, I think it'll look a bit more defined IRL than it does in these pictures. But otherwise that would be quite the chaos. Let's talk about, okay, early season NBA reactions. Who do you think is looking great so far, and who are you low key worried about? Non-Raptors. We'll get into Raptors in a sec.
Well, I think you got to start with the Nuggets. I think they look great. I think the way that they've kind of pivoted, because everyone was kind of like, hey, what's going to happen with Bruce Brown gone? What's going to happen with
Mhm.
Jeff Green gone? And they're just like, hey, we've got some young pieces that we're going to give more playing time to. And, guys like Peyton Watson, Julian Strother, they're getting an opportunity. And obviously, we saw Christian Braun uh, kind of shine in moments last year, and he's getting more of an opportunity. And so I think they've got the young pieces to step in and fill that void. So I think they look great. The Celtics obviously look amazing to start the season. And so they've definitely got it a lot more together than the Bucks at this point. I wouldn't say I'm like worried about the Bucks at this point, but as soon as the trade happened, it was like, hey, what's the defense going to look like, right? And I think for everything that Drew Holiday brings on that end of the floor, uh, Damian Lillard is obviously lacking, and they've lost Grayson Allen. They've, Chris Middleton, after dealing with the injuries, what does he have left defensively? And you've got a first-year head coach in Adrian Griffin. So I am a little concerned about the defense. We'll see how that plays out. And then it's definitely weird to see the Grizzlies already 0-5,
Yeah.
right? Like that's probably the big one that no one really saw coming.
Yeah, my pick is also the Grizzlies, the one that I'm the most worried about. I mean, they haven't won a game yet this season. They're, I mean, John Morant's going to come back after 25 games, but they, unfortunately had their injury to Steven Adams, who's out for the year as well, and they're just lacking bodies right now. And I don't know if this team is going to be able to emerge as a playoff team this year. They might be fully in the lottery, and I think for them that's obviously a huge setback compared to where we saw them in the spring. So that's definitely the team I'm most worried about. In the Eastern Conference, the Miami Heat are 1-4, and they've lost their last 4 games. And I know everybody's always like,
Heat
we don't
culture.
heat culture, la la la, like, it's all that matters is what happens in the playoffs, and we don't care about the regular season and all of this. And like, I feel like that's a dangerous line to walk on. I mean, obviously we saw what they were able to do in the playoffs last year, but I feel like, it's kind of like what we were saying about the Clippers earlier. It's like when you really don't take the regular season seriously, it becomes harder to regroup for the playoffs. And, it's possible that last year's finals run kind of gave this team a false sense of like, we can do whatever and we'll be fine and we'll be there. And it's like, that's like what they did last year was incredible, but I wouldn't call it sustainable. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think obviously injuries can happen with any playoff run, but they did get a bit fortunate in the Buck situation with Giannis getting hurt,
Yeah.
right? And obviously there were some extenuating circumstances that we learned later about Coach Bud as well, dealing with
Mhm.
the loss of his brother. And so I think there was just a lot going on for the Bucks that kind of contributed to that upset. And then I think things worked out in terms of getting the Knicks in the next round, right? And so that was a favorable matchup. They obviously did really well to get past the Celtics. There's nothing you can really take away from that. And so I do think that, on the one side they made the finals, but at the end of the day, they were also a team that got into the playoffs via the play-in tournament, and they've come into this season having to find a way to make up for the losses of Max Strus and Gabe Vincent. And so you miss out on Damian Lillard because everyone thought that that's where he was going to end up. And then on the back end of it, you maybe should have been able to come away with the Drew Holiday. You didn't do that either. And so, I think that this is a team that you're going to respect when you come up against them, but I won't be surprised if they miss the playoffs this time around.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, they're a real wild card for me at this point. And obviously, I agree with you. Who's looking the best right now is the Nuggets. I mean, they did have a bad loss last night against the Timberwolves, but I think generally speaking, like when you win a championship and then you come into the next season acting like you have something to prove, that's a really great sign. Like I think all Nuggets fans should be super excited for this team. They did have, like I said, they had their dud last night, but it was November 1st, and I think the night after Halloween just isn't a good night for some teams. And we'll get into that really shortly. But yeah, I think the Nuggets are looking amazing, and super, super excited for them.
Shout out the NBA for disrespecting them once again. Opening night, putting out the whole banner of like you had Steph Curry on there and LeBron on there, and not no Jokic, no Murray. Like you've got the champs, and you make no mention of them on the poster. Okay.
Yep. Which I guess adds to their whole like we have something to prove attitude, which
Exactly.
I actually really like. So
Yeah.
that's very cool. Okay, let's move on to our Raptors homer moment here. We had a really big win against the Bucks after a really terrible loss against the Trailblazers. I was on the Confederacy of Dunks podcast after that loss to the Trailblazers. My opinions might have been a little more harsh than they should be overall, but Vivek, what do you make of the adjustments that they made to turn this around?
I think the biggest thing that we probably saw change over was, and this is what they talked about at practice, was hey, we can't just be passing the ball for the sake of passing the ball. And the thing that Darko has been harping on is getting into the paint touches, and then kicking the ball out, creating real penetration. And I think that's what we saw against the Bucks. The ball movement wasn't for the sake of ball movement. And there was a lot of purpose to the drives. There was a lot of purpose to the screen setting. There's a lot of purpose to the cuts to the basket. And so I think that is what helped open things up. And then obviously the 3-point shot falling was a huge factor, right? We don't expect this team to be a good 3-point shooting team. And we've seen so far through 5 games incredible highs and just terrible, terrible lows. And this was one of those nights where they couldn't miss a thing. And I think the crazy part is Grady and Gary Trent were the worst shooters on this night. Like they were a combined 1 for 13. And the rest of the team was 14 for 25. Like you really wouldn't, like that is as Halloween a shooting night as you're going to get. And so I don't expect that to repeat too many more times over the course of the season. But I think the overall sort of purpose with which they played, which was in stark contrast to the Bucks, I think that was a big difference.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know if people went out on Tuesday night or not. I was hungover. So the second I saw the score, I was like, oh, the Bucks must also be hungover. I kind of tweeted, where did they party last night? Because people allegedly like to come to Toronto and have fun here. So I kind of assume that's what last night with the Bucks was really about. I think they saw the Portland game, decided that we suck and that they didn't have to show up for us or try very hard. And honestly, like I was at that Portland game and I really feel like I want my money back. So I kind of I kind of get it. Like I felt like a glorified G League team, to be honest, when we were there. But I mean, I'm so glad that the Raptors turned things around. I mean, this is how you want to see them respond after a loss like that. And so, even though the Bucks didn't really show up, I would still consider it a great win. You mentioned Gary Trent Jr., who's been struggling really to start this season. Like I didn't put this in our docket, but do you have any thoughts on Gary Trent Jr.?
Yeah, I am disappointed in the sense that over the course of his career so far, he's done very well as a starter, and then he struggled when he's come off the bench. And I thought this would be the year where, especially when he's talking about how much Darko has communicated with him, that he'd be more open to it and he'd have a better start to the season and he'd be okay with coming off the bench. That has not been the case. And I think he's really struggling. Obviously, he had the one opportunity to start when OG was out. But I think on the whole, he hasn't really taken to the role. And, the whole 0.5 decision making is maybe not his strongest suit unless it's to shoot the ball. Right. And
Right.
so I think that's where he's going to have to, make some adjustments. And then defensively, obviously, for the most part, he's a liability. And so when those things aren't adding up, it's like, okay, why not just give Grady Dick an opportunity and just, get his reps up and improve him. And then obviously we saw Otto Porter Jr. get into the game and have some good minutes. So the good thing for Gary is that Darko does seem like the type of coach who's going to give you some run and give you an opportunity to figure things out. We've seen that with Malachi Flynn, for example. Obviously he's had some big struggles, but he's been able to play through it, and he had a good performance against Milwaukee. And so, I really hope he can figure things out off the bench because, as he said before this season, with regards to the starting role, the writing's on the wall. And so he is not going to start for this team. It is going to be Dennis Schroeder and OG and Pascal and Scottie and Yak. And he's just going to have to embrace it.
Right. And I don't, it's not like his playing level has justified taking any of those players out of the starting lineup. So, it makes sense that you have to kind of like play for your role in a sense. And like it has been really great that Darko's been giving everybody more of an opportunity. I mean, obviously that was a huge thing that was lacking last season. I think I'm the only one on planet Earth that has been mildly critical of Grady Dick. I think everybody just loves him so much that nobody wants to critique him. But I felt like, and I was more criticizing this during the Portland game, where I just felt like he was hanging around the perimeter too much. He wasn't really like cutting and doing his best to get open. And I feel like he's not really stretching out the defense because his shot isn't considered enough of a threat to really stretch that out. So I don't know what your observations are. I know everybody's like, oh, he's been great. I'm really happy with him. He's also a rookie and he's only played like 5 games. So again, like I'm not suggesting like my expectations of him should be so high. But what is your stance on Grady Dick in his first few games?
I think within the context of being a rookie, he's had a good start.
Right.
I think that you're bound to see the mistakes, some of which you've already pointed out. I think you're bound to kind of take on whatever is going on the court, and that kind of gets contagious. So we talked about the lack of purposeful ball movement and player movement in the Portland game. I think you kind of get sucked into that when the rest of your team is doing the same thing. And
Right.
again, this Milwaukee game, everyone comes out shooting the ball, is feeling good. You come in and it's like, okay, I got to keep it up. And, there's kind of a standard to maintain, and that pushes you. And so I think we've seen some of that, but I think there's been enough sort of on ball drives to the basket and opportunities where he has cut, has got in on the glass a little bit, has tried to commit defensively. We saw him pick up that charge on Giannis where I'm saying, hey, this is kind of what I want to see from a guy who's going to get, 15 to 20 minutes a night. And so I I think he'll continue to progress as the season goes. I think, for those who watch Summer League, like you kind of saw progression there too, where he'd have a bad first half and then kind of figure out what was going on and then look better in the second half. And I won't be surprised if the season plays out that way, where, he's trying to do the right things, but sometimes they don't work out in the first half of the season. And then there's like a continued progression in the second half of the season.
Yeah, I love everything that you're saying about not just ball movement, but intention. I think that's been a huge part of this year so far. Because I wanted to ask you about like the Raptors culture this season and what you feel has changed. Like we know they are passing the ball more. They're kind of like running through more possessions. And like, there's been stuff written about like dribble handoffs and split actions that the Raptors are doing more this year and stuff, really just trying to get away from the whole selfish thing that Masai was saying at the end of last season, right? But I think the intention part is a big part of that. Do you feel like that's been the biggest difference this year with the Raptors, like culturally overall?
Yeah, 100%, like 35 assists against the Bucks, right? And so I think within that, there is going to be growing pains, and there is going to be some of what's still stuck over from last season that has to still be washed away. And so it's not going to be 100% natural to them. And so there is going to be a transition period, and I think they'll progressively get better at it as the season goes along. We saw the really slow start to the season for Pascal, and now, this Bucks game was really great to see from that standpoint. And then I also think, there's going to be times where you got to look at last season and say, okay, or even the last two seasons and say, not everything Nick Nurse did was bad.
Right.
Like I think there are going to be times to double team and trap and be really aggressive. There are going to be times where you're going to look at Pascal and say, hey, you are our best chance to get us a basket right now. Please go do your thing. And I think you can still mix in some of that. But I fully understand that for now, the emphasis has to be on kind of washing away everything from before and having this be the baseline thoughts that run through every player. And then you kind of trickle in a little bit of what you want to add on top of that.
Right. And do you feel like this new system that Darko's implementing, do you feel like that is in part why maybe Pascal has struggled to start the season?
Yeah, no question. I mean, we're seeing the ball in Scottie's hands a lot more, right? And then also in Dennis Schroeder's hands. And so I think they're looking for Pascal to score in different ways than he did last season, and obviously be a lot quicker with his decision making. I think last season, and I don't think it was selfish by any means. I think that's just how they wanted to play, where it's like, hey, we're going to put the ball in the hands of our best player, and we're just going to play off of him and trust his decision making. And that's how they operated. And now, obviously, it's a very different look. I think, Pascal, the 3-point shooter, is going to be really tested this season because he's going to get those catch and shoot opportunities. And when it looks like it did last night, it's going to look absolutely amazing. But then there's going to be the nights where, as a team, they shot 14% against Portland. It's going to look not so great.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's going to be a learning season for Pascal as well. But at the same time, talk about the writing being on the wall. It's clear that this is transitioning to being Scottie's team now. And I think Pascal is just going to have to accept the reality that he was given 4 seasons as the guy, and he didn't become the guy,
Right.
And so, you had a good run at it. It didn't work out. You can still be a very, very good player.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. Do you feel like this effort that the Raptors put out last night against the Bucks, do you feel like this effort is sustainable? Do you feel like they have raised the bar for themselves and that this is what we should expect from them night in and night out?
Effort, I think, is always sustainable. I think the question is will they shoot like that
The
again and again
results.
and again? Exactly.
Yeah.
And so have they raised the bar and set a new standard in terms of, again, that intent, that purpose with which, they get into the offense early? There's, understanding of who's where on the court. This is what Darko talked about as well, right? It's just a fundamentally different type of attack when you have Scottie on the left side of the floor versus the right side of the floor. Where is Yak? Where is Pascal? Where is OG? Understanding those things. And again, that's chemistry that has to build, but making decisions off of that in the right way, and having that intent that, hey, we're not just going to, pass it side to side and then someone takes a three. We're going to dig into the paint and then kick it out and have defenders kind of helter skelter and get good looks that way. And so I think they've kind of told on themselves that they can do that.
Right.
And so now the challenge is, hey, keep doing that. And then you can kind of live with having bad shooting nights, because that, you kind of just expect from a team that doesn't have that many 3-point shooters.
Right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely the best way to say that. They told on themselves. Absolutely, they did. Okay, let's move on to our Raptors Hottie Highlight of the week. And, this was an interesting week because we had 2 former Raptors coaches come visit this week. We had Nick Nurse on Friday, and then we had Adrian Griffin last night, and different reactions to them returning. Scottie Barnes, after Nick Nurse came back, was like, we didn't really get the chance to say hi. I don't really know, blah, blah, blah. Right. And then there's like a clip of like Adrian Griffin being back, and it's like all hugs and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so funny. Maybe, I don't know if we could do a side by side of those 2 responses. Very, very different responses that I think were very funny and very telling.
Yeah, I think, if there's one thing that Nick Nurse needs to reflect on, as far as his, success in the NBA, future success in the NBA is concerned, and longevity and all of that, it's, on the one side, you look at the teams he's coached and the fact that he's won pretty much at every level and every team that he's been at. On the other side, you look at, it's like, hey, why does this guy not last with a team for more than like 3 years?
Right.
And so I think that's something that you look at least as a head coach, right? Because obviously he was an assistant with the Raptors for a long time. In total, he was with this organization for a decade. And so as a head coach, is there something that, when the chips are down, does he maybe, get a little too crazy and push the players a little too hard, that kind of, makes them want to push back or just, completely disconnect?
Right. Which is what we saw. And, I think it's a player driven league, and, this isn't college. So it isn't about the coach's ego. And I think he's kind of more that style of coach where it is kind of about his ego. So we did see that unfold, and we see it unfold now in terms of like their relationships. I do think it's funny though that even like Nick Nurse was like, oh no difference, whatever, I'm really happy where I am, blah blah blah. No statement about like, hey, like my time in Toronto was really great, blah blah blah. I think it still stings.
Oh,
I think
100%.
it still stings. I actually think even on Scottie's side, it still stings, because they were both doing this like, I'm over my ex. Like, I'm over my ex. I don't need to see them. I don't need to talk to them. I don't even need to look at them. I don't need to acknowledge them, and that's kind of how there are residual resentments. And I think that is still very, very true. But it was just kind of funny to see it unfold the way it did.
Yeah, and it's a shame, right? Like, for
Mhm.
someone who won a championship here, you'd like to think that it doesn't need to feel that way, right? Like, when Casey got fired as the number 1 seed, like, you can understand, and having won coach of the year, you can understand the resentment. You can understand the frustration especially when, they trade for Kawhi. And I'm sure Dwayne is probably like, I would have loved to coach that guy and have him the last few years,
Yeah.
And so for Nick to have as an amazing an opportunity as he was given, and, for that to be Masai's first real shot at bringing someone that he wanted, because obviously he inherited Dwayne Casey, and to still go with Nick. It's a shame to see things be as sour as they seem.
Right. Because, he could have like come into town and been like, like I said, hey, Toronto was great. Really enjoyed it here while it lasted. Really enjoying my new situation. I think there was just a way to give a similar sentiment a more positive spin.
Like, you don't think DeMar had bitter feelings when he came back for his first game? He still had nothing but love and expressed that. Even if he did have maybe a bit of frustration with Masai that first game back, which by all accounts, it seems like that's been cleared up now. Like, he was still like, I love this city. This was home for me. All of that, right?
The fans,
like, not
blah,
even,
blah. Yeah.
Even you say something, hey, this will always be the place that I won a championship. I'll always have great memories here.
Right.
Like, something small like that. You look back at that press conference. He said more nice things about Canada basketball than he did about the Raptors.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't know, like, okay, as a media member, Vivek, he kind of had that weird moment last spring where he was like talking about Philly and reflecting on his time in Toronto prematurely. And then
Philly, that was in Philly.
In Philly. And then people tried to ask him about it, and then he kind of resented being asked follow-up questions about that moment. Do you feel like that hurt his relationship with Toronto media? Can you answer that question?
I think there were several ways he answered questions that hurt his relationship with Toronto media.
Yes.
This was probably the final nail in the coffin, in the sense that, again, you said those remarks in Philadelphia, where there really wasn't much Toronto media. The question was asked by Tim Bontemps of ESPN, wasn't even asked by a Toronto media member. So naturally, you would think that when you come back to Toronto and there's more of a Toronto media presence, that someone is going to ask you about it. And so to push back the way he did, and to make it seem like, oh my God, I got to keep answering this, when it was literally the first question that someone in the Toronto media had asked about something that he brought up on his own, was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was. And I think that was probably the final nail in his coffin in Toronto, let alone his relationship with Toronto media. I just didn't know if, like, when he came back now, right, all these months later, and like he's kind of being a little tense about, not really reflecting on Toronto. Like, do you think that just has something to do with like him being in Toronto, or do you think he's just like, oh, I don't want to face this group of media people again, or maybe it's not that intense for him?
Yeah, I don't think it's that intense for him, but I do think he made it weirdly intense about being weird about the situation.
Right.
Like, even when they kind of cut to him after like during the tribute video, he was kind of trying to be all like, oh, I'm just looking at, what play to run, this and that. And then, oh, they're clapping for me. Like, oh, I didn't know that was happening. Like, okay, dude. So yeah. I think he was just like very weird about the situation. And I think that, you'd like to think that you'd be on better terms with someone that was part of the championship core. Because you think about some of the returns the players have made, right? Like the first time, yeah, we hated that Kawhi didn't come back, but how about that ovation when that first came back? You know? Serge, the first time he came back, for all the hate that Fred got last season, I guarantee you, he is going to get a nice ovation.
Yes, I agree.
When he plays his first game here. And so Nick obviously got a nice ovation, and eventually he gave a nice wave and everything, but I just don't think he needs to be this weird about it.
Yeah, that's on him. I agree. I appreciate you sharing those thoughts, because I expanded on that conversation in ways that, again, was not in the docket. But Vivek, thank you so much for joining me again. Always love having you on this show. Remind us again about your cricket Substack and everything else you're doing Raptors related, and where people can find you on the internets.
No, first off, thank you so much for having me, Catherine. You do a great job with this pod, so I always love coming on. And yeah, you can, if you're a cricket fan, you can check out Play in the V. That's my Substack, and everything's linked on my Twitter. I also have a Twitter account called at Play in the V, so you can get in on that. And then basketball wise, I'm going to be doing like general NBA stuff most of the time at Sportsnet, and then Raptor specific stuff at Yahoo.
Perfect. Thank you again. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye.